Okay, so we are now recording. We should be live. Everyone should be able to go. There we go. Our attendees are coming in. So I'm David Embers. I'm the secretary of the student interest group for AMSSM. I'm joined by Dr. Stephanie Kliethermes. Hope I said that right.
Good.
Little bit about Stephanie. She serves as the research director for AMSSM and the Collaborative Research Network, and she's the assistant professor in the Department of Orthopedics and Rehabilitation at the University of Madison in Wisconsin. Her background includes expertise in biostatistics and research methods. Her research focuses are on the application of statistical methodology and design of sports medicine topics, including youth sports, specialization and participation, concussions, and running biomechanics. So that was a mouthful, but she's obviously very well accomplished, and she's here today to give us a talk about kind of sports medicine and getting started early for all of us that are interested in pursuing sports medicine research in the future. So have at it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, David, and also Luke, for inviting me to talk with you tonight about research and getting started in research. I'm obviously very passionate about research. My degree is in biostatistics, so I've done a lot of training in research methodology, and just excited to share some tips with all of you. So I'm going to turn off my camera for now, but you'll be able to hear me as we kind of go through the presentation, and then once we get to the Q&A, I'll turn my camera back on so that you can see who you're talking to. But hi, this is me, and I am now turning my camera off. So getting started in sports medicine, certainly med students are incredibly busy, and you have demands on your time that are great. And so why is it important to participate in research, right? So I'm going to give you just some tips on how to get started and just talk a little bit about what I see as some of the benefits of research, as well as some of the barriers that you might encounter. And then I also want to focus a little bit and introduce you to AMSSM research initiatives and endeavors, because there's a long history of research within AMSSM. So let's jump in. First, I think it's really good to kind of to understand and know the history of sports medicine. So sports medicine has a long history, and it's the father, so to speak, of sports medicine is said to be Herodotus, who first used exercise to treat disease. He was treating gladiators, and he's believed to be the tutor of Hippocrates, right? So the father of medicine, he's actually essentially predates him. So sports medicine has been around for a long time. And some of the landmarks in the development of the field of sports medicine include in 1912, this German committee, they held a meeting because they were hosting Olympics and their athletes kept getting hurt. And so they were trying to figure out ways to provide medical care for their athletes. There wasn't a sports medicine physician that attended the Olympic Games. And so they were trying to essentially care for athletes that were hurt. In 1928, then the International Congress of Sports Medicine said, well, we're just treating athletes. What about trying to prevent athletic injuries from starting in the first place? And that's really where sports medicine kind of got started. And after that, so that's really 1928, not incredibly long ago. And then you'll see on the right-hand side, then there's the slew of all the sports medicine type societies that came to be. So the NATA, the Athletic Trainers Association, was in 1950, followed closely by ACSM, and then the Orthopedic Surgeons for Sports Medicine was in 1972, and finally AMSSM in 1991. So we're less than 30 years old, but really the advent of research in sports medicine started with these societies, or they really kind of gave the impetus to starting to conduct research. And a lot of the body of literature has come out since the inception of these organizations. So why do we need research in sports medicine? Well, interestingly, much of sports medicine has developed empirically. And what I mean by that is that the treatment that is provided to an athlete or to an individual reflects a practitioner's experience as opposed to evidence from any research findings. So you don't have to go too far down various treatments to really find one that doesn't have strong evidence backing, and it's just being used because the physician or a group of physicians has figured out that it works. And this is somewhat problematic, especially given the current emphasis these days on evidence-based practice. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But at some point, you can't just say we've always done it this way, right? It's not going to cut it for patients who are looking for the best care that they can receive. And so just to give you some examples, in 2011, I was done with my sport playing days, right? I made it through youth sports, I made it through high school sports, and I made it through collegiate sports by 2011. Yet that was the first time that there were research studies looking at the evidence behind ankle brace use in sports and whether or not they prevented injury. So we obviously knew that they worked because many of my teammates, volleyball, basketball, were wearing ankle braces, but we didn't have any evidence to support the fact. And think about one of the common conditions treated by sports medicine physicians today, concussion. It wasn't until 2013 where the first research studies came out that were suggesting exercise at a subsymptom threshold level actually may be beneficial to treatment of concussion and getting athletes back to sport in a quicker than if you just kind of keep them at rest in a dark room. So research is obviously important to help us not only advance the practice of sports medicine, but to put evidence behind the treatment of sports medicine. And one reason why I love being in this field, especially as a biostatistician, is that because many topics within the field of sports medicine are wide open. So we're certainly doing research in a vast vast kind of topic areas within sports medicine, but there's so much yet to be learned, and there's so much that needs to have evidence put behind it. And so it's a lot of fun. I think it's a field, if you're interested in research, that has a lot of potential moving forward, basically because it's developed without this strong evidence base. So I assume many of you have heard of evidence-based medicine, and I'm not going to rehash that to you right now, but obviously evidence-based medicine is a big buzzword now, and it's really using your clinical expertise, the values of patients, and then research to figure out the best way to treat a patient or a condition. We know that clinical performance deteriorates over time. So the further away you get from your medical training, the worse your clinical performance becomes. And so that's why it's really important to be up to date on evidence and use the best research evidence to try and guide your care. And I wish I remember the name of the person who made this statement, but I was reading an article recently, and the claim was that today's clinician, if you're today's clinician and you cannot critically read a study, you are as underprepared as someone who cannot take a blood pressure, right? And so you need to have a strong understanding and ability to be able to critically appraise research, whether if you want to be a good physician, was essentially what they were trying to say. And I think this is important even if you don't conduct research, right? So you may be interested in research and you may become an attending in a private practice and may just not have the resources to conduct research. But I think it's really important that you either go through the process while you're in training or get a good understanding of the process, because that's only going to help you as you, it's only going to help your clinical performance as you kind of progress through your career. So what are some of the benefits of research? Well, I think we can probably split up the benefits into two different categories: the benefits for the field of sports medicine and then benefits for you as the physician. So thinking globally, benefits for the field, certainly it's going to influence the practice of sports medicine. So we want to constantly improve how we treat our patients. And research helps us do that, right? We learn which treatments might be viable, which ones may not work. We seek out alternative treatment methods to ones that currently exist. And we also improve patient health outcomes, right? There's a big push within the research world today to involve patients in research and really understand their specific outcomes. PROs is what we call them, patient-reported outcomes. And so as a clinician, this is one of your primary goals, right? To keep your patient healthy or to get them back to a healthy state so that they can be active again. So for the field, benefit's going to help, research is going to help us to do that. For you as a physician, I think the benefits are numerous. You're going to develop the research skills that are necessary to actually engage in evidence-based medicine and develop a deeper understanding of the scientific process. The scientific process isn't easy and it's not necessarily a linear path. And so the way to really understand that is to put yourself through it and to really understand where the benefit or where the limits and some of the roadblocks in research are. And you'll also develop a stronger skill set for critiquing scientific studies and clinical practice. And I think that this is really important. Again, this is where research where research affects everyone, whether or not you're a physician scientist or you're a clinical physician that doesn't conduct research. You really need to have that skill set of being able to critique scientific studies because that's where you're getting your information. As a biostatistician, I had to put in the benefit of it's enhancing your statistical literacy because I think that's really important when you're critiquing scientific studies and reading through studies because that's really where the evidence comes from through the statistical analysis. And so how can you know, you need to be able to determine whether or not what you're reading and the conclusions from the authors are actually supported by the study and the results, or if there's some inconsistencies in that. And lastly, I think the soft skills that you develop are really important, and the connections you make with leaders in the field really help enhance you both as a clinician and as a researcher. So lots of different ways in which I think research is incredibly beneficial for you as a budding physician. So let's talk a little bit about the potential barriers to medical student research. These barriers are not going to be new to you. These are barriers that will exist as a medical student or as a first or second year resident, fellow, whatever you may be, and they're going to stay with you throughout your career. And so the earlier you can figure out how to break through these barriers and how to potentially avoid them or work through them, I think the better and more successful your research career is going to be. So think of, lack of time, insufficient research training, minimal mentorship. I think funding's not essential. It certainly helps in conducting research. And then no personal interest or motivation. So I think every one of those except for funding, you're going to need to be able to break through in order to be successful in research. Research takes time, and there's no way around that. And so you really are going to have to figure out a way to devote time or manage your time so that you can give the necessary attention to the research project that you're doing. Sometimes it's hard to find mentorship on research because clinicians' attendings are incredibly busy, and as part of your medical school curriculum, you may or may not have sufficient research training. And so you may need to figure things out yourself or find resources in which to help you conduct research. But those are barriers that you'll kind of have to figure out and are not necessarily, they're kind of unique to each med school or each institution in terms of what resources and the level of mentorship guidance that's provided. And certainly, if you're not interested in research or you're not motivated in research, then the setbacks, and there are setbacks and they're numerous, they're going to kill your desire to continue in research. So you really need to make sure you have that personal interest and motivation to conduct the research in order to be successful. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides as well. So let's go on to, you're interested in research, right? You know you want to do research, but how do you get started? I think when I was kind of thinking about this, there are 4 steps that you shouldn't overlook. And I've listed the 4 here: self-reflection, seeking out opportunities, developing research ideas, and learning the process of research. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about each of these four topics. But real quickly, I think you always need to know your purpose. So you need to reflect at very early stages why you're doing research. Why are you interested in research? What specific topics are you interested in? All of that come to play and really set the foundation for your research portfolio and career moving forward. The next two, seek out opportunities and develop research ideas, I think can happen in either order. You can either seek out research opportunities and figure out what they are, and that may actually lead into a research idea. You may find a physician that is conducting research in an area that you're interested in, and so then that naturally leads to development of a research idea. Or it could be flipped, right? You could be in clinic, or you could be observing a clinic, and you may have a question that pops in mind and say, oh, I'd really like to look at that further. And then based on that topic, you're going to go seek out opportunities to be able to answer that. So I think both of them are uniquely important, but can happen in different orders. And then the last one is learn the process of research. So there are many ways to learn the process of research. Obviously, the easiest one is to do it. But there are also other ways. If you're not actually conducting research, you can attend research seminars, you can enroll in courses, you can listen to webinars, all sorts of different ways in which you can learn the research process. But let's break these down just a little bit further. So self-reflection. Here's the difficult truth about research. It's hard and it takes a lot of time. Yet it can be very personally and professionally rewarding. It's the reason why I conduct research. I feel I've always wanted to be able to help people, and this is one way in which you can certainly make an impact on the fields that you end up in. But it's important to know your interests and your goals. So you shouldn't let someone talk you into a project just because it's their major interest area. Like I said, research is challenging. And if you're not interested in what you're doing, you're setting yourself up for failure. So really make sure that you know what interests you and what your goals are in research, and try and align that with individuals at your institution or wherever your environment is where you're looking to conduct research, and make sure that those align as best you can, because that's really going to set you up to succeed and to continue on when research doesn't go the way you think it's supposed to go. So figure out what interests you. And this is just more of a practical reason. When seeking opportunities, you're going to be asked your reasons for conducting research. So it's good to have those in your back pocket. And that's kind of why I listed this as number one. If you're writing an application for some sort of grant or a physician scientist development award, or you're even talking to a professor or a clinician at your university who you're interested in potentially working with, they're going to ask you these questions. And so having put in some thought about why you might be interested in research, whether you want to learn more about the research process, you've always been interested in answering questions, you're really interested in contributing to the literature, whatever it is, just make sure you've kind of given that some thought so that you're ready to talk through that when opportunities arise, because they do arise, and they arise in many different ways. So let's talk a little bit about seeking out opportunities. My first bullet point here is don't let lack of motivation be disguised as lack of opportunity. And what I mean by this is that one of the most common things I hear are that there's no opportunities for me to conduct research. As a medical student, as a resident, as a fellow, not necessarily as a fellow because you're required to do a research project, but certainly in the undergrads and med students, the common misconception is that opportunities don't exist. But the truth is, most opportunities are driven by student interest, and there's no one way to find a research opportunity. They look different in different environments, which probably makes it a little harder to figure out what opportunities do exist, but it really requires you to be proactive as a student and foster connections, ask questions to figure out where the opportunities may be, because you may have to dig a little bit for them. I think it's important to be okay with doing the less glamorous parts of research. So when you're first getting started, you may be really interested in working with a physician who's conducting a research study, and it may involve digging into patient charts and pulling out outcome data or pulling out information from patient charts. That's a very tedious thing to do, and it's very time consuming, but yet it's a very important part of the research process, and you'll learn a lot from that. So you may not be the PI of a study conducting a randomized clinical trial, and that's okay. And that's really probably better when you're getting started to really just kind of do some of those menial tasks that contribute and contribute to the research process, but may not be the most glamorous ones of writing up and being first author on a manuscript, that kind of stuff. Another point when you're trying to find opportunities is to remember that physicians are busy. And so it's important to be persistent. And I'll tell you a story. One of my colleagues here at UW-Madison, she's a sports medicine physician, and she refuses to answer medical student inquiries about conducting research with her until they've emailed her 3 times. And then she knows they're serious. And so she will answer, and she often has a spot for them. But you really need to convey to physicians and that you are really interested in what you may bring to the table, what you're willing to do to help with their research agenda, and why it's important to you. And if you don't hear back from the physician the first time, send them a gentle reminder. And even the second time, send them another reminder. And that's okay, as long as you just go about it professionally and really just express your interest in figuring out ways in which you can work with them on various research projects. And lastly, I think don't overlook summer research programs. I know a lot of med schools, if you're an early stage medical student, kind of in your first year, between that first and second year, that's when you have time to conduct research or get started. And so don't overlook what your institution might offer. At my former institution at Loyola University in Chicago, we hosted summer research programs for our med students called the STAR program. And up here in Madison, we do the same thing. And so those research programs not only get you in the weeds conducting research with faculty mentors, but they also introduce you to a lot of good webinars and presentations and seminars on the nuts and bolts of research. So seek those out, see what your institution offers. I know it's a little harder when you get to the latter stages of med school and you enter residency because your summers are now filled and you don't really have a summer off, but just keep that in mind that those opportunities are available and know what your institution offers. So let's just talk a little bit about these different places where you can find opportunities. So within your institution, I just talked about the summer research programs, that those exist, especially for med students between first and second year. There are a lot of programs that offer this. If you're really interested in research and know you always have been, and it's something that you are interested in pursuing and you think you want to be at a research institution as a clinician or physician scientist, look into dual degree programs. Sometimes that means taking a year off of medical school and getting a master's or getting a master's of public health or a master's of science, or if you're even want to go even further, you can go do the PhD, which might take another year. But consider those options. We have a lot of members within AMSSM who have these dual degrees, a lot of MD, MPHs, and a lot of MD, PhDs. So it certainly can be done, and something to consider if research is high on your interest list. I don't know if you know what clinical and translational science awards are, but these are awards provided from the NIH to institutions, and they're basically big research centers at institutions. So Loyola had one, University of Wisconsin-Madison has one, and their goal is to help facilitate research at the university or the institution. And they offer a lot of different awards, research opportunities, presentations, grant opportunities for budding and training physician scientists. So look into what they offer and what resources they have, because they're a great place and resource for you as you're looking to get started in research. And don't overlook your department research opportunities. Oftentimes, if you're interested in a certain department like sports medicine, you can look into the Department of Orthopedics, or maybe there is a Department of Sports Medicine, whatever it looks like. Just inquire with some of those professors and departments and see what opportunities they have. Those informal conversations go a long way, especially if you're willing to kind of reach out and ask questions. So institutional opportunities, there are also national opportunities. And I just wanted to bring this up. The NIH has what are called Career Development Awards, and they're affectionately known as K Awards. So it's something that most of you won't be eligible for right now. If you're a fellow, you could potentially be eligible for one of these awards right now, but they're really geared towards early physician scientists, early career physician scientists. So once you've completed your fellowship, you're at a research institution, or you're at a place in an environment where you can actually conduct research. So you'll see on this figure over on the left-hand side, medical school and residency, the opportunities are kind of there's nothing there. But as you kind of progress in your training, there are more opportunities. And these K Awards are rigorous awards that are given to physicians and clinicians to help them establish independent research programs that will carry them on through their careers. And I think it's important for you to know this, because even if you aren't eligible for it now, it's never too early to consider if this is something that you might be interested in and applying for in the future. Because what you can do now as a medical student or as a resident is you can begin establishing credibility and the credentials that will set you up for future success in these to get these awards. So think about these, look into these if you're interested in them. We have many investigators within our society who either have this award right now or who have had it in the past. I can think of 2 investigators at my current institution, and I know that we have many more as well. So this can be done, and sports medicine has a history of getting these types of awards. Also consider some nonprofit organizations, and I just gave you an example, the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. They offer yearly a Clinical Scientist Development Award, and the purpose is similar to the NIH, where they're going to fund research projects for early career scientists. So you have to be an assistant professor at that level, but they'll give you $150,000 each year and the indirect costs, and then it's like $15,000 in indirect costs to conduct a research study for 3 years, which is a great sum of money to get a research project and research portfolio up and running. The hard thing about this particular award is that your institution must agree to 75% protected research time, which may not go over very well if you're at a clinically heavy institution, and you may not particularly be interested in 75% research, but these opportunities do exist. The Doris Duke Foundation is a big one, as is the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So some of these charitable foundations offer funding for you to get started in research and really kickstart a research portfolio. So those are some of the opportunities. Let's flip now to developing research ideas. One of the first questions and probably most frequent questions I get from beginning researchers is, I don't know what to research. I don't have a good research idea, and it prevents them from actually starting research. And so I've listed here just many different topics or ways in which you might develop a research idea. You can attend a scientific conference or national meetings. Research is inevitably going to be part of those meetings. You can talk about cases that you saw in clinic or that your attendings have that may need further attention and can potentially be studied. Certainly journal clubs where you're reviewing scientific articles, or you may just be curious about something that you think might fit a research study. I have numerous young investigators who are just curious, and then they come to me and say, how can you help me take this curiosity and develop into a actually actionable research question? Recent research studies may elicit new research questions or further research in the same area. Or there's always new treatments and diagnostic tests that are becoming available, and all of these tests need research. There needs to be an evidence base behind them to actually make them effective or see whether or not they're effective in practice. And I'll tell you a quick story that one of the kind of the best research advice that I've ever been given in terms of developing a research idea. So for me, in my background, my PhD is in biostatistics. And so my dissertation was I had to come up with a new statistical method. And so that seems really daunting, analogous to coming up with a research idea. And one of my mentors said, you don't have to come up with the next t-test or linear regression. In fact, you're not going to come up with the next big breaking thing. What you need to do is climb to the tallest branch of an 80-foot tree and just add one leaf to that tree, right? So you just need to make one little change to something that potentially already exists. So whether you read a research study and it's in one population and you want to mimic that in another population, or you just want to make one slight change in how you treat and how you maybe give a treatment or the dose or whatever it might be, that's enough to develop a research idea. So don't feel like you need to come up with the this big breaking kind of news flashy research question. It can be something really simple, and oftentimes those are the ones that lead to the most success, especially if you're just trying to get started. And once you've answered that first question, it often then snowballs into larger questions that eventually can be answered in a much broader and bigger way with research funding. So the last point I had on getting started in research was learning the process of research. And what you see here is on the left side, I've kind of created a research roadmap. And it's false in the sense that research doesn't happen in a linear fashion, right? So you're going to kind of hit some roadblocks and kind of do some U-turns. But generally, you're going to come up with an idea. You're going to do a literature review. You're going to design the study, and then you're going to cut through all the red tape needed to actually get the study up and running. You're going to collect all the data, analyze the data, and then figure out what your results are and report on them. And on the right-hand side, I've given you the different skills that are needed for the different parts of research. And so you'll see that there are a lot of intangible things, right? You need motivation. You need to be able to pay attention to detail. You need to think critically and be caught up in the research literature. But then there's some specific research components that you really want to be able to develop the skills for. So for example, I'll just pick one. So let's say conducting a literature review. And I said, understand how to use common medical databases. Well, you may be able to go into PubMed right now and type in just maybe concussion in youth soccer, and you're going to come up with a slew of results that are going to help you with that literature review to understand what literature is available on that topic. But let's say you're interested in conducting a meta-analysis or a systematic review. Then you need to really learn how to develop a systematic search, both plan for that systematic search and conduct that systematic search across a broad range of databases to be able to identify all the articles that are pertinent to your specific topic. And that's a lot easier said than done. There's a very specific way in which we approach that type of study and that type of systematic search that's very different from just starting to Google in a database or search in various databases words that might be affiliated with your research topic. So you'll learn that, again, by conducting research or reading up on systematic reviews or whatever it might be. So learning the process of research, I think, is really important as you're getting started, and something you should seek out when you're looking for those first research projects. What are some of the dangers to getting started? Well, I work with a lot of sports med fellows and residents, certainly, who are local to my institution. And one of the biggest things is biting off more than they can chew. So their eyes are wide. They're really excited to conduct research, and they want to do this large prospective study, but they may only have a year to get it done, especially if you're a sports medicine fellow. All sports medicine fellows have to conduct some sort of research scholarly project, and they may want to conduct a prospective study that it's really impossible to finish within that year time span. And so I often have to counsel them back a little bit into something that's much more meaningful so that they can have a successful research experience. I often, unfortunately, also see individuals not working as part of a team. And I can tell you from my perspective as a statistician, that might mean trying to write the IRBs by yourself and not utilizing the resources within your department with someone who's skilled at getting protocols through an IRB. Or I've had researchers come up to me with data already collected, and they've unfortunately not set up their database appropriately in a way that can be analyzed by a statistician. And so they've done all this work on their own just to realize on the back end that they actually are going to have to go back and redo all that work. So I think it's really important. Research is a team effort. It's not something that can be done by one person, and different people are taking the leads on research at different times. So you really need to be able to identify who your team is and who needs to be part of that team right at the onset. Otherwise, you're in danger of that project kind of falling apart. Straying from your research question is another danger. So we really try and focus on a very specific research question as opposed to multiple research questions that can lead you astray. But as a new investigator, I often see you answering a research question, and then you see your data, and there are 10 more research questions that could potentially be answered. But that loss in focus actually dilutes the meaningfulness of the research you're trying to conduct, and sometimes to a point where your purpose of that research gets kind of lost, and it then never gets finished or published, or it can't get published because you've really lost that focus. So straying from your research question, you really want to stay focused, and that begins with development of a research question. I could spend a whole hour just talking about how to develop a research question because it's the most important part of research. It really sets the stage for everything, the dominoes to fall beyond. And then if you've done all this work, it's really disheartening if you just don't get it over the finish line. So there's always a home for every research project. Whether it's you're presenting it at a national meeting, or you're submitting an abstract, or you're writing a publication or a short report, whatever it might be, I really encourage you to kind of get it over the finish line. And I think that's when you can say that that research project was a success. So almost finishing up here, what type of projects should you look for? Some of you might find an ongoing prospective study that needs some help with, that you might be able to luck into one of those, right? And I think that's great. Prospective studies, being involved in those really help you learn the process of research, and you kind of see where the roadblocks are and where the various red tape is. But sometimes that's really impractical. Well, it's impossible to kind of finish those. And so I would encourage you to start with something that's a little more manageable, especially as a medical student where you're competing for time and you have other demands that might take priority. And so the type of projects that I would suggest include retrospective chart reviews where the data is already collected and you just have to define your research question, then go back into those medical charts and pull out the information you need to answer that research question. That often saves quite a bit of time. You still need to go through the IRB process and specific research channels, but you take out the component of prospective research and data collection that has a lot of hurdles and can be very time-consuming and costly. Certainly meta-analyses and systematic reviews. This is a type of secondary research where you're collecting data from already published articles and looking at the holistic body of literature on a specific topic. These as you know, are the pinnacle of research because they really tell us whether a treatment is effective or not, if the evidence base is strong enough and we have enough data enough research articles to support that. So if there's a topic that, there are many topics in sports medicine that need systematic reviews and meta-analyses, and that's certainly a topic that would be feasible for a younger investigator just getting started because it doesn't require collection of data. Now, there's a whole process to meta-analyses and systematic reviews, and they're very time consuming, and they can be tedious, and you have to follow kind of step by step so that they're done correctly, but very rewarding and very informative and helpful to the field as a whole if they're done appropriately. You can also look at places that have already collected data. So our university here at University of Wisconsin-Madison, we have 8 years of data on our athletes. And so we constantly pull that data and identify research questions and use that data. You can look at NCAA injury surveillance data or High School Rio or High School Nation through the nonprofit organization called Dataless. There's a way to apply for that data if you have a research question that might have some interest in injury surveillance. Those are great ways to really, again, make use of already collected data to kind of make something a little bit more manageable. And there are other national ones that may or may not align with a sports medicine related question, such as NHANES or the National Survey of Children's Health. Those typically have more physical activity type measures in them as opposed to sports specific measures, but some of those do have some sports information in them as well. And lastly, survey-based studies or cross-sectional studies. These are usually kind of quick to get the data. So if you do want to collect data, this is a way to get quick, easy data that, again, you may have time for, but don't underestimate the time that you need to develop the survey. So the actual gathering of the data is pretty quick, but the development of the survey and making sure you're asking questions appropriately and you're asking what you mean to ask, there's a whole philosophy to developing those surveys. So you'll want to be able to spend time in the development phase, even though the data collection phase may not be as important or as time consuming. Okay, so I've wrapped up kind of that. I just want to talk briefly about research in AMSSM. So I'm just going to take about 5 or so more minutes to talk with you about what we have in AMSSM, and then I'll open it all up to questions. One of our founders and past presidents, Dr. Jim Puffer, said, for any discipline to be legitimate, it has to create its own body of knowledge. And this has really become the battle cry for research within AMSSM. We really feel our founders have been really, from the inception of AMSSM, and our board of directors have been really focused and supportive of the idea that sports medicine as a field needs to create its own body of knowledge. It needs to conduct research if we want to be known as a legitimate field. Some of our goals in AMSSM are listed here. So we want to grow investigators. We want to help investigators find collaborative opportunities, be able to provide them some money to be able to conduct research, help provide mentorship, especially in grant applications, and support their research endeavors in any ways that we can. And kind of holistically, our goal is to create a research infrastructure at AMSSM that not only fosters research, but also provides infrastructure that will allow our sports medicine researchers to answer big questions. And if you can't answer the big questions, at least start chipping away at some of those questions. So I know this is kind of a busy slide. There's usually some animation to it when I present it in kind of a live format, but this really shows you the progression of a sports medicine researcher according to AMSSM. So at the top step, this is where you're going to affect national practice, right? You're going to be able to change policy. It's those $1 million NIH federal grants that actually change the practice of sports medicine. So the question is, if that's the pinnacle of sports med research, how do we get there? Well, we start with what our research committee focuses on, the AMSSM Young Investigator Awards and AMSSM Foundation and Awards, which are usually smaller awards from about $5,000 to up to $25,000, where you can submit a proposal to conduct a research project that focuses on kind of a small, good clinical idea, maybe 2 sites, single site, just a small study to kind of get some pilot data. And once you kind of have, if you get that award and once you kind of gather that information, then we have the AMSSM Collaborative Research Network, which I'll talk about briefly in just a second, that offers much larger dollars. We're talking about $300,000 to provide multi-site studies that then allow you to set you up to kind of get some confirmatory data to prepare you for an NIH level award. So within AMSSM, we've worked over the past 30 years since its founding to really build this research program. From stage 1, where you're just a young investigator, residents are eligible, certainly fellows are eligible. As a med student, you're not eligible yet, but it's important to know that any research you do in med school could certainly continue on as a young investigator award as a resident when you go on to residency, and you would be eligible to apply for that. But this is a way within AMSSM that you can seek funding to get from that beginning stages all the way to an expert in a particular research area. Our research committee is very strong and active within AMSSM, and they're responsible for sifting through all the research submissions and choosing which ones are presented and which ones become posters, as well as our case reports at the annual meeting. And they also facilitate our grants program. So the research committee does quite a bit for AMSSM. They've also developed, they also run our Fellows Research and Leadership Conference that happens every summer. And so this keeps them busy. As a resident, as a med student, you aren't eligible to be part of the research committee, but you are as a fellow. So you can certainly attend the research meetings at AMSSM at our annual meeting, but you do need to be a fellow to kind of start actively participating in there. But our research committee is responsible for quite a bit of things at research endeavors within AMSSM. And the important thing about our research committee is that they focus really on research within the organization. In 2016, I came on board as AMSSM's first research director, and that's when we launched the AMSSM Collaborative Research Network, or the CRN. And the mission of the CRN is now to work kind of external to AMSSM. We want to foster collaborative multi-site research among our members with the goal of advancing the practice of sports medicine. So we're now wanting to bring in collaborators external to AMSSM to help fund multi-site projects. We want to start establishing connections with the NIH or the CDC or other national organizations like the NATA or AOSSM to see if we can continue to grow that body of research knowledge within AMSSM. And so I've listed here, you just see pictures of our current CRN leadership team, but I encourage you to, if you're in any of these places, to seek out their names and who they are and just have conversations with them, because they are certainly some of the leaders of research within AMSSM. I have 2 more slides for you. This one we developed recently, last summer, I believe, a fellowship research opportunity manual. So as a fellow within AMSSM, as I mentioned earlier, you're all required to conduct some sort of research project. And we, the CRN, put together this research manual that takes injury surveillance data and is kind of a how-to guide on how to go from the step 1 of designing a research question or coming up with a research question to actually conducting a research study using Daedalus' injury surveillance data. So this should be accessible to all of you, and I encourage you to take a look on the AMSSM website. It's underneath the fellowship category, but you should be able to reach it. And if you can't, then I will ask Joan to be able to, if we can put it on the student membership section, because this is one opportunity for you if you're kind of struggling for a research project or a way to get started in research. I encourage you to look at this manual because I think you'll find it very useful. And then lastly, come and present research or case abstracts at AMSSM. So our research deadlines are coming up here this year, but they're usually late fall of every year. And as a a student member, as a med student, you can submit an abstract and you can be selected to present both a podium and or a poster. The only qualification is that you have to have a senior author that's listed as listed on your abstract, who is a full active AMSSM member. But we certainly encourage you to start coming to the meetings and engaging with our researchers and talking, submitting what research you're doing, as long as you kind of have that sponsor to help you out. And so I've put the link there for you, so you're welcome to kind of look through that on the AMSSM website. So that is kind of what I have for you. I see David. I'm gonna turn my camera back on so you can see me. David, how do you want to run this? I see your question. How do you recommend students balance being on research projects in med school versus residency versus fellowship if they change universities? So I'll answer that question, and then certainly I can take any more questions as well. That's a really good question, and it's often very challenging, especially going from med school to residency, because you're typically not, the project you're working on is typically not your own. And so you really want to focus on, when you're in med school and or when you're in residency, finding those projects that you can start and finish while you're there. It's really hard to carry on a project from one institution to another institution. Now, when you're in fellowship and then you go on to become an attending somewhere, I think it's a lot easier to carry on projects, because now you kind of have a sense of ownership of that project and you can carry on the torch, and you have a little bit more flexibility in conducting research when you're an attending physician. But this is one of the difficulties in, say, applying for our grants that we offer, because they're typically 2-year grants. So if you're applying for a Young Investigator Award and you're a resident, and you only have 1 year left of residency, and you're going to go to a new fellowship and you don't know where that fellowship's going to be, you're probably not likely to get that award, simply because you don't know what the setup is going to be at your new fellowship location, and if it's going to be possible to get that award. Now, we have had residents who have applied who actually know where their fellowship is going to be, or they have 2 years left in residency, and so that works out well. But it's a good question. It's really hard to kind of switch from location to location, and so my best suggestion is you really stay focused on what you can do at that institution while you're there, as opposed to trying to carry on from place to place.
Okay, I'll ask one more here that I've been thinking about. Besides the National AMSSM Conference, is there another avenue for presentations, posters that students could pursue that you would suggest?
Yeah, so we certainly, ACSM is a great place. Any of the other national organizations, I would consider looking at what their policies are for presentations, but ACSM is a great way, and we have a lot of our students here at UW who will present there. And sometimes you're working in a very specific topic that may lend itself to presenting at a concussion conference, or at a youth sport conference, or a female athlete triad conference, whatever it might be. And I think that's where you really need to talk with your research mentor at your institution, but don't feel like AMSSM is your only place that you can present research. I'd encourage you to look at NATA, or AAPM&R, all these other organizations that are within the sports medicine field. They have similar processes in which you can present your research as well.
In the world of, so being a medical student now, obviously we all think that, getting in contact, like you talked about, with an attending that can help you get on a research project. In the coming years, as we shift into being residents, is it something that is normal for residents to kind of do the work to get a med student team put together, or is that normally something an attending physician does?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that depends on your attending physician. So we will often, our residents here at UW are often given that ability to kind of find med students to help them and develop their research team. But I know that's not the case at all institutions. I think it depends on just how your research mentor, whoever the PI of the project is, what kind of control they want to have on the project. But certainly we have a culture here at UW-Madison where the residents are given a lot of control in research and kind of take ownership of building their research team that includes med students who are conducting research. And I don't know, that might have been some of your guys' experience as well as med students at your institutions.
Alex noted that the manual is link is blocked for students, so we'll have Joan take a look at that and get access to that. And then we had another chat from Lauren who said that the PM&R meeting always has musculoskeletal sections for posters, so that's good to know.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any other questions that anybody would have that they can write them in the chat section, and Dr. Kliethermes can see it, or if not, we can wrap the chat up. That was so helpful and very informative. Thank you so much.
Right. Yeah, no problem. I'm certainly happy to take any questions now, but my email address is on the slide. Feel free to reach out as you're thinking about research or any questions about AMSSM or research in general. I'm certainly happy to field anything as you kind of continue through your careers.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Kliethermes. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great night and a good week.